Southeast Radio's Business Matters with Karl Fitzpatrick.
Southeast Radio.
Welcome back to Southeast Radio's Business Matters with me, Karl Fitzpatrick. Well, my final guest this week is the Chief Executive of Ibec, Danny McCoy. Danny, I'd like to start the interview by finding out about what Ibec members are saying to you about their plight during COVID-19.
Well, Carl, it is, as you might expect, Ibec represents a very broad church of Irish business. We're 7,500 members and we have 36 different trade brands, things like Retail Ireland, MedTech Ireland, Biopharma Ireland, Retail, etc. So the story is quite mixed across, but in every single case, everybody's worried about cash flow and having the amount of liquidity in their business so that when we get a recovery, they can both keep their staff and get back up and running fairly quickly. So different sectors have different pressures right now. MedTech clearly will be doing well, and that's what's related to the virus. But by the same token, there's a lot of elective surgeries which will require knees and hips and stents for hearts that aren't happening. So, you know, when you see the name on the tin, you might say they must be doing very well, but it can be patchy even within those kind of sectors as well.
And for those that are most hit by it, what are you hearing from them?
Well, look, we've done some work on this, and we see up to about 45% of Irish companies are in complete lockdown now. They're just not functioning. Their hospitality, retail, as we know, very heavily impacted. Not so much on turnover. Turnover tends to be concentrated more in those companies that can still function, service-based manufacturing. But the ones that are most in distress with no cash flow, the schemes the government put in place have been helpful, but there's a lot of anomalies, particularly in the temporary wage subsidy scheme. So there's a lot of distress out there, as you can imagine, and the uncertainty of when people can get back to business continuity, not business as usual, but everyone realises this will be a gradual ramp-up. And there's a lot of concern about people whether they'll be able to keep their businesses intact during this hibernation so they're ready to go again.
And how would you evaluate the government's response in terms of the measures which have been announced in recent weeks to assist businesses during this pandemic?
Well, look, we went into the pandemic much stronger than any other economy, actually, both in Europe and then globally. So we have the firepower to deal with this crisis better than most. And the government approach, and remember, it's a government that's caretaker government, actually, so it's waiting for the new government to come in place, has really taken the approach of taking credible steps and a kind of a low build-up. So certainly behind the kind of big measures, bazookas and others have done, for instance, in the UK. But if they get there with these credible steps and be ready for the takeoff, it's been pretty good so far. Very few societies could cocoon their labour force with a pandemic payment of €350 a week. That's good that the state can do that for the 12 weeks, but it also creates quite a bit of pressure on those using the wage subsidy scheme to try and keep their employees intact. So you've got this tension between those two schemes. They're far from perfect. But overall, the government's instincts are right here. I think if we had a stable government, we would see more decisions have been made quicker. I think some things are being held back for the new government.
And what additional measures would Ibec like to see introduced to assist the business community by this new government?
Well, first of all, stability is the first thing. So we need to get cash to companies, and at least access to that cash to ensure that they can both stay in hibernation and ready to take off. And so for some really small and microfinances, borrowing won't be enough. So there needs to be a cash injection. The government needs to put money directly into those businesses. We've called for about €15,000 cash injection, because without the companies there, the employees will be on the unemployment. It will cost the government way more than $15,000, even in the short term. So $15,000 into those businesses helps them get kick-started, start to deal with their suppliers, their staff in the first 5-6 weeks of recovery. And then for the vast majority, they'll need a little bit more capitalisation and liquidity. The first wave is obviously forbearance. So in other words, not having to pay back immediately. What might be out there, be that like in the household mortgages, but in terms of business loans, rates, moratoriums on VAT returns, etc., will help. So we need to keep the cash circulating. If we can keep the trust between businesses to business and business to government, This actually can be quite a quick recovery. I know people are very depressed and very down about it, and we fear of the unknown, and it's global. If our instincts hold and we hold our nerve, it will be bad. It is bad already, but it will be a whole lot worse if we lose trust in each other. And the financial crisis was when we lost trust with each other, and people didn't know what debts people were passing off to each other. Then member states got suspicious about each other. This time it can be different. I'm not saying it absolutely will be different, but it can be different. So we should have some hope here. So I think fairly good prospects. If we get the liquidity to the businesses, I think we may avoid the worst of the possible outcomes.
And are your members calling for more tax reforms and additional assistance from the banking sector?
Well, yeah, the banking sector are going to have a role to play, and it's very different this time as well. It's only a few short weeks ago when we know that our banking system actually had more cash on deposits from Irish households than Irish households had borrowings from our banks. There's 110 billion euros of cash on deposit from the Irish households, from the private sector. So there's an awful lot of cash in our society. And so the real fear is that people, when they get frightened, they hoard cash, they won't pass it on. And that actually makes the problem even a lot worse. So that the banking system can be certainly a huge part of getting us reflated. And on the question you asked around taxation, well, actually, this is definitely not a case for austerity on the way out of this. So tax cutting agenda is probably more significant than tax increases. In time, when the economy gets up and running again, it will generate the resources and the tax revenue that the government is going to need to pay back the really significant debts that will emerge. Government deficits could grow anything up to 10 to 15% of economic activity in the short term. But once we get the engines going again, that hopefully will fall, just like the unemployment rate will fall very dramatically as well once we're up and running.
If you've just tuned in, I'm speaking to Danny McCoy of Ibec. Danny, there has been much discussion about how the bill arising from the economic stimulus package will be settled. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, as I said, this is quite different this time around. Is that it's a global phenomenon, so it's not, within the world. It's not people versus people here. It's people versus virus. And while that may sound a bit twee, it also means the economic solution will be quite different. Is that the way to make sure that money circulates is to make more of it. And so the global central banks are going to do that. The tragedy is the transmission or the channels in which that money gets into the right areas at the right time and the right way is going to be the challenge. That's where the banking system comes in. That's where the state comes in. The revenue commissioners in particular have a huge role to play here in Ireland. Not all banks have a relationship with every business in Ireland nor with every household. The revenue commissioners in our welfare system, the government, has that relationship. So the revenue commissioners, I think, will be an important source of transmission and forbearance and getting money, rather than taking money from us, to get money back in for a time period. To your point about the scale, I think the debts that will be racked up here will be inflated away, because one of the features that we know, if you increase the money supply and don't increase the amount of goods, what happens is the price of goods go up. So we should expect inflation to increase in the next couple of years.
And how are we going to manage that increased inflation?
Well, again, as a society, inflation can be quite discriminatory in the sense it can be quite random as to who gets impacted by it. So, for instance, those who own the wealth don't like inflation. Those who have debts get the debts inflated away. I think one of those things comes back to what we needed anyhow, even before coronavirus, is we need a social dialogue to say, look, we've lots of things to mediate in our society, and one of the things we require is a commission on taxation, to have a much better taxation system for the world we live in today.
Now, of course, the government's solutions to providing working capital to businesses over the last number of weeks have been through the Microfinance Ireland loan of up to €50,000 for businesses with less than 10 staff, and then through a range of SBCI mechanisms through their working capital scheme and, of course, their future growth scheme and their credit guarantee scheme. What are your thoughts on those?
Well, first of all, there's a huge plethora of schemes, so you'd be going dizzy as you start to read through them as a business owner to find out, will they actually help in this regard. So the first thing to say is they're there and they're open for business, but it's going to take a little bit more time for business owners to determine what is their needs at this time. Some companies can very easily handle further debt. Lots of companies, SMEs, have actually been paying back loans over the last 10 years. And so we find a lot of companies actually are in reasonably good shape in terms of what debt they're carrying at the moment. So for them, they can take on more debt. But there will be a substantial number of businesses for which debt won't be the solution, and they're going to need to give away some of their business, actually, in terms of getting equity. In other words, getting people to invest, be that the state or other sources. So business owners, there's enough debt opportunities, take on more debt opportunities now available. I don't think that will be the constraint of many people. But whether their businesses can cope with that or not, they may have to be open to saving their business by taking on more equity investment. And that's something we haven't had a great tradition on in Ireland, even though Enterprise Ireland do a great job with larger businesses. We've been pretty shy in the micro businesses for those type of equity solutions, but they're emerging. So there is hope in that regard.
Yeah, and realistically, Danny, are we likely to see the state taking equity in some sectors? And if so, which sectors are likely to receive such support?
Well, I think it's hard to say at this remove, but first up, you can imagine, given the sheer problems that have emerged in the aviation, tourism, hospitality, they're the most devastated sectors right now that we can see. And it's more pervasive than that, but they're the ones that one would think it's going to be a lot longer in terms of recovery because of the behavioural response of people around the world, people's capacity to want to travel, to go to foreign countries and so on. So you can see that for an island nation like Ireland that's a global hub, aviation is going to be a significant part of that, so that there will be probably equity stakes required in some of the aviation sector. Certainly some of the hospitality sector may require that. But again, strategic to the country, depending on how long this lasts, more sectors may become candidates.
Now, you mentioned the temporary wage subsidy scheme earlier in the interview. What advice have you been giving to members in that respect?
What really pulled the rug from underneath the efficacy of that scheme was the pandemic payment. Pandemic payment at €350 per week for those who are losing their job temporarily because of COVID. That scheme is going to be in place for 12 weeks. I think that we will need to get people off that scheme. Obviously, the basic dole payment's €203. $350 is an exceptional level. The state couldn't afford to have that for too much longer. It also creates disincentive, as we know, to get back into work. For a lot of people, that's been a pay rise during these phases. And so the advice on the wage subsidy scheme, it is that companies, want to hold on to their employees. It's not just that they want to hold on to them for any high sentiment, of course they do, but it's also the fact that we have a tight labour market. 4 weeks ago, we had a full employment economy. One of the biggest things at the start of 2020 was getting staff. If this works, if we get back in action reasonably quickly, holding on, having good staff is going to be critical to businesses in their reboot.
And Danny, on the topic of unemployment, what figures is Ibec predicting in this regard, both on a 1 and 3 year basis?
I've gone on the public record to say, unfortunately, but I think it would be a great achievement if by the end of this year our unemployment rate is at 10% and falling. I can't see us, unfortunately, getting back to a 5% unemployment rate in the next 18 months. I think we'd probably see unemployment at double the rate that it was just 4 or 5 weeks ago. That's a tragedy, but we will be doing well to get to that point, I think. But we certainly won't see what we have today, which is 25, heading for a quarter of the labour force heading for unemployment. That won't be, that luckily is going to be a temporary phenomenon.
And in terms of the inevitable relaxation of the COVID-19 restrictions, apart from construction, what way do you see this working from a business perspective?
I think last in, first out, as in things that close down last, will probably be the things that will start off first. In other words, those things that you can't do from home. So anybody who's capable in the services, just like Ibec, 100% of us, and now, 4 weeks ago went home working, are probably going to be the last out of this kind of phenomenon. So, and I think that's probably right, that you want to get, in the phase, you want to get those activities that can't be done from home actually done. So we see a lot more manufacturing, the entire manufacturing sector back, construction, obviously distribution utilities are still being going, and services slowly but surely. And it may well be, maybe something like the younger people in the services sector return faster than some of the more vulnerable age groups. So we need to do this in a kind of a considered way, because one of the lessons we've learned as a society, this is a huge shock. We certainly don't want to have a second one of these next winter.
And what, in your opinion, will be the most transformative aspects to how we live our life in a post-COVID environment?
I think in Ireland, actually, we probably took us a while to realise, first of all, what a wealthy society we were. Something that I've been saying for some years is that for society to be able to take that scale of a population not working and provide that type of income support is a huge achievement. I know people don't think about these things, but boy, in contrast to other societies, the way we've been able to, as a society, come together and shield each other, both economically as well as in the public health, is something to be massively proud of. But what it also exposes is that our welfare system is designed for poverty alleviation rather than being an income support. And I think that shocked people who are on, 40, 50,000 euros a year to realise that suddenly, not alone will it be 350 a week, but potentially could be down at a base of 203 a week, is not an income support. And I think that our welfare system and the way we do our PRSI is in for a quite significant conversation about how we fund our labour market. And for employers, that'll have to be an alleviation in terms of what gets paid in wages and what gets paid in social insurance. But sustainable business won't be able to take a jump on both of those. We're going to see, I think, a lot more socialist type model, the European socialist model, coming into Ireland. And then that's the big challenge to us, to ensure that it doesn't erode the competitiveness, flexibility, and the way we do our business in Ireland. We don't want our way of life and our working way of life to be to the detriment as a result of changes. But there are opportunities there as well, which I think we should grab with both hands.
And Danny, finally, what sectors will need to adapt most following this crisis?
I guess, unfortunately, social activities. I think one of the experiences that social distancing have said is the capacity for very large, intense groups together. We'll probably find that the hospitality sectors, our restaurants and our pubs, hopefully they will come back. They will come back, but they will be different. But we've adapted before. We've adapted to non-smoking work environments. We can adapt to this as well. So I think we will find that societies, even though we were shocked, the decay factor in terms of memory and so on will decay over an 18-month period. And I would hazard that 2 years' time will look pretty much the same as 2 months ago.
Well, if you've just tuned in, that was Danny McCoy, the Chief Executive of Ibec, and I would like to thank Danny for sharing his insightful assessment of the current crisis with us this morning.
Southeast Radio's Business Matters with Karl Fitzpatrick.
South